Wrestling fans. Hello wherever you are. I am turning the calendar to 1992. January 6, 1992 Wrestling Observer Newsletter, Inside Edition on Steroids, STARRCADE 91. Snyder Obit by Observer Staff at WrestlingObserver.com, at 14W. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228 Campbell, California 950091228. January 6, 1992. STARRCADE 91, The Lethal Lottery. The Inside Edition story stemming from lengthy interviews with superstar Billy Graham, David Schultz and Jesse Schultz, David's 20-year-old daughter, on the subject of anabolic steroids and Hulk Hogan was scheduled to air on Friday, January 3, which would be prior to most of you reading this. Behind the scenes in wrestling, this story has been viewed as having the potential for significant impact and possible embarrassment to the World Wrestling Federation, and to Hogan himself. As of this writing, I'm aware of the key statements made on camera by both Graham and Schultz to Inside Edition reporters, which went a lot farther than what has been reported already that Graham claimed to have shot Hogan up with injectable anabolic steroids on several occasions in the past. Inside Edition, a sensationalistic-oriented pseudo-news show that aired a piece on November 16 regarding the pro wrestling/anabolic steroid connection and the trial of Dr. George T. Zahorian III, interviewed both Graham and the Schultz family for more than 3 hours apiece in recent weeks as the basis for Friday's story. The story was considered so important that Inside Edition called its main producer in from vacation to put together the piece, and high-level producer Sally Brax, who has never even done field work interviews in the past, was assigned to handle the interview with the Schultz family. According to Brax, this story has been examined closer by the show's attorneys than any piece in the history of the program, which presumably covers a lot of ground considering the type of stories the show has done in the past. On Monday, Titan Sports told the show that they wouldn't respond to any of the charges. "There's not a whole lot to respond to," said WWF spokesperson Steve Planamenta. "It's kind of a dead-end issue." Planamenta said they could put Hogan on Inside Edition and say that he wasn't lying, but that Graham would then say he was, and it would never get anywhere. The WWF wanted Inside Edition to include in the piece that they had instituted the new testing policy and contact the doctors, but Inside Edition didn't do so. This piece will no doubt open the door wide open to more features on the subject. ABC's 2020, which interviewed me for more than 2 hours a few weeks back on this subject, has already scheduled a piece for February which would be on the use of steroids in sports in general, but would be focusing on pro wrestling and the repercussions of the Zahorian trial. It is expected that the case of Hulk Hogan will be featured as part of the story. A highly rated 60 Minutes television show is said to be considering doing a piece as well. Undoubtedly, far more mainstream media stories will result from these pieces. What this will all mean to Hulk Hogan, the World Wrestling Federation, and pro wrestling in general remains to be seen. As has been written here many times, media interest in this story will continue to come back as long as the problem exists, and as long as there are rating sweeps looking for a scandal. Titan Sports will invoke the word steroid testing as its defense, but the ESPN special on anabolic steroids a few weeks back made it clear to even the general public just how easily beatable the tests are. Steroid testing for public relations purposes isn't going to quell future stories on this subject so long as it's obvious that a significant percentage of pro wrestlers are heavy steroid users. As for World Championship Wrestling, they'll likely ignore the story as best they can, since Titan, as the high-profile Northeastern-based company, will wind up taking virtually all of the heat. Yes, Hogan is a scapegoat who is apparently going to wind up with a lot of bad publicity over alleged usage of a drug that has been used by an estimated 1 million or more Americans and a sizable percentage of athletes in many different sports. At the same time, it was his own lack of honesty in dealing with this subject both on Arsenio Hall and in the many interviews during his publicity tour for Suburban Commando that created this situation for himself. Of course, all of this discussion of cause and effect doesn't address the real story. The real story isn't if a scandal plagues WWF and or WCW, or if they'll take some heat, ignore it, and go on with business with little damage or even some genuine long-term damage. It isn't if guys can be taught to beat a steroid test. The real story is the short-term and long-term effects of anabolic steroids in heavy doses. It's a story not limited to pro wrestling. The facts. We have virtually none. Anabolic steroids are indoctrinated in most power athletes who grew up in the 70s and 80s. Scare tactics about side effects don't work on them for several reasons, among them 1. Doctors have no credibility with athletes because athletes believe doctors lied to them, and they claimed for so many years that the only athletic performance-enhancing quality of anabolic steroids were as placebos. In reality, the doctors didn't lie, they were educated to a lie and presented what they were taught as truth because the American Medical Association and the American College of Sports Medicine lied in medical books about the actual power of the drugs. 2. The amazing feeling of power and invincibility the drugs give the user. 3. Size is very psychologically addictive, and even though anabolic steroids have no physical addiction, the psychological addiction in many people to the size and the feeling of power is incredible. 4. The side effects that have been reported may have been overdramatized, but we really don't know for sure because while we can point out many cases of significant health problems, and even some deaths, on a percentage basis no long-term studies have been done measuring risks versus rewards. Then there is the ethical problem of unbalancing the playing field in competitive sports that steroids causes, and with the exception of perhaps bodybuilding and powerlifting, in no sport is this as much the case as pro wrestling. But within the business there is no consideration of an ethical issue, it's an accepted part of the business. Athletes who have used the drugs that were legal for private use until 1 year ago believe they have the right, despite possession and usage now being a felony. So we have a legal problem of having a sport in which by and large, the most successful performers are playing with felony charges, and it's just a question of who will be the next unlucky one to get caught. Obviously, those who get caught will be a minute percentage of those who use, so on a percentage basis, the new laws have limited effect, just as laws prohibiting most drugs have very limited effect. The drugs are legal in Europe and your most successful bodybuilders nowadays have some kind of European connection. It was no secret that wrestlers in both groups were loading up on Primobolan, which one can get over the counter in England, while on tours. So while we can pretend there is no use and offer tests as corroboration while at the same time offering what is basically affirmative action programs for those who are heavy users and can beat a test, the reality is obvious each week on television. And while we can point out a Billy Graham or an Ed Gantner or a Savannah Jack as someone whose wrestling career, or even long-term health or life has terminated prematurely because of steroids, every wrestler and bodybuilder can also point to Graham's contemporaries in bodybuilding or powerlifting who used every bit as much steroids or more than he did and are now in their early 50s, and appear to have no permanent damage from it. Of course, those are the guys who have stayed visible. What about the vast majority of Graham's contemporaries that simply disappeared from the scene? The answer is, we don't know. If they do die at 62 instead of 72, the fact is no long-term studies have been done to prove that, and even if they are done and it is proven, people in their 20s will still deny the results or simply not care. Anabolic steroids in small doses and maybe even large doses may be able to be used where the rewards outweigh the risks. It's possible and one shouldn't be bullheaded to the point of not accepting it as a possibility, just as one shouldn't be bullheaded to the point of accepting it as a reality without question. That's the underlying and real story. But the cover story we are and will be dealing with over the short term is simply denying reality for public relations reasons. Zahorian himself was sentenced this past Friday for his conviction on 12 counts of steroid and controlled substances trafficking of 3 years in prison, 2 years probation for each of the 12 counts, a $12,700 fine and forfeiture of his half of his $3.7 million office/condominium complex because the jury in the case ruled it was used for committing drug distribution crimes. The U.S. Justice Department sent out a 4-page press release regarding the sentencing with stern warnings saying that this sentence is a message to all doctors who prescribe and distribute anabolic steroids for athletic purposes that they should consider themselves on notice from the government. I'm expecting that if the WWF even responds at all to what will be alleged provided Inside Edition goes with the most powerful allegations, the response will be to attack the credibility of Graham and Schultz rather than address the veracity of the claims. I've discussed the statements made with other wrestlers and wrestling personalities over the past 2 weeks who were around Hogan during the time periods discussed. Nothing Schultz or Graham claimed was outright denied by anyone. Many of the stories, but not all of them, were corroborated. Schultz, who wrestled professionally from 1976 to 1988, is best known for his slapping 2020 reporter John Stossel in a December 1984 incident in Madison Square Garden when the program did that tremendous job of journalism in establishing that pro wrestling wasn't true competitive sport. In fact, 2020 has refused to interview Schultz as part of their piece because of that incident. Schultz did claim in a pre-trial deposition, according to sources at 2020, that when Stossel sued Schultz and Titan Sports, and collected $425,000 in an out-of-court settlement from Titan and its insurance company, that his attack on Stossel was under orders from Vince McMahon. Schultz, 41, was good friends with Hogan in the Memphis and Pensacola circuit when Hogan first broke into wrestling as Terry the Hulk Boulder. In fact, Hogan used to regularly stay at Schultz's home in Nashville when he was working the Memphis circuit. He later worked opposite Hogan as a headliner in the American Wrestling Alliance and jumped with Hogan in December of 1983 to the WWF. However, Schultz was fired by the WWF in 1985 after an incident in Los Angeles when he attacked actor Mr. T in an unstaged incident. After retiring from wrestling a few years later, Schultz gained some national notoriety as a highly publicized professional bounty hunter, bringing fugitives to justice. Schultz, who was one of 43 pro wrestlers listed as receiving FedEx packages from Dr. George Zahorian, admitted in the Inside Edition interview to using steroids from the late 1970s through the remainder of his wrestling career, saying it increased his weight from 200 pounds to more than 280 pounds. Graham, 48, who held the WWF title in 1977-78, is scheduled for a mid-January on-camera interview for the 2020 piece. He'll be appearing on virtually every pro wrestling radio show this coming weekend, going into greater detail on the story Inside Edition will be coming out with. It is expected that Graham, who has several other mainstream media interviews scheduled, will call for a boycott of WWF events until they honestly address the issue. He called their statements in regards to the issue since the Zahorian trial as an attempt to deceive the media and the public. In the tradition of the famed bunkhouse stampede, now there's Battle Bowl. If there's one thing that can sum up STARRCADE 91, it's that WCW produced a pay-per-view show that wasn't even as good as most of its recent free Saturday night television shows. It was one of those shows where you sat there and waited for what would happen next, figuring they were saving something special, but that something special never came. Before going on, what needs to be mentioned before anything else was the camera work, or maybe the work of the director calling the shots, as they managed to miss far too many spectacular spots. Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone were frequently making references to moves and incidents, not just in the Battle Royal but in many of the tag matches that the viewer couldn't see because the cameras were pointed somewhere else. It's considered the cardinal sin for an announcer to talk about something the viewer can't see because it makes the poor camera work obvious. But geez, if they didn't, we'd never know that there actually was some good stuff taking place in the building. 1. Jimmy Garvin and Marcus Alexander Bagwell defeated Michael Hayes and Tracy Smothers in 12:42 when Bagwell pinned Smothers with the Fisherman Suplex. Our cable went out during this match so we missed most of it. Actually, the blank television screen was looking like it was going to be the best match on the card after the first 4 matches were over. Bagwell seems to have a good deal of potential. 2. Rick Rude and Steve Austin beat Van Hammer and Big Josh in 12:55 when Rude pinned Hammer with the Rude Awakening. That finish certainly tells you that the mega push for Hammer is over. There was no heat at all when Hammer was in. That's surprising considering Hammer's alleged charisma. I use the word alleged because I wouldn't want to be sued for libel. Rude didn't sell some of Josh's blows to the stomach because he's got the ripped abs. They then worked on Josh for several minutes to get heat. But that didn't work either. Paul E. held Josh and Austin went to jump on him but Josh moved and Austin jumped on Paul. Josh made the hot tag to Hammer who was cleaning house for a few seconds until Austin made a blind tag to Rude who finished Hammer off. 3/4 star. 3. Dustin Rhodes and Richard Morton defeated El Gigante and Larry Zbyszko in 6:11. There was no wrestling to speak of here but it was intriguing and had a good finish. Zbyszko and Gigante argued. Zbyszko slapped Gigante who put on the claw, then threw Zbyszko into a double dropkick by Rhodes and Morton for the pin. 3/4 star. 4. Jushin Liger and Bill Kazmaier defeated Diamond Dallas Page and Mike Graham in 13:08 when Liger pinned Page. What a waste of Liger. Liger did a few nice moves, some of which Graham didn't sell right since he's probably never taken those moves in his entire career. He did do the Liger dive to the floor, but the cameras missed it. Kazmaier was horrible. 3/4 star. 5. Lex Luger and Arnold Anderson beat Terrence the world's most unappreciated great wrestler Taylor and Tom Zank in 10:25. Taylor worked as a face and was the best wrestler on the show thus far. As he got one pinning move on after another on Luger, he was finally stopped as he set up the 5-arm with a blind knee to the back from Anderson. Luger pinned Taylor with the pile driver. From a wrestling standpoint, this blew away everything else on the card. 3¼ stars. 6. Ricky Steamboat and Todd, one half of the world's most uncoordinated tag team champion, beat Cactus Jack and Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker in 7:48. Parker got up from his chair before they even announced him as Jack's partner. Abdullah the Butcher in the heel dressing room then destroyed Parker while all the other heels stood by nonchalantly and didn't even seem to watch. The gimmick was that Abby was mad because he wasn't Cactus' partner, but I think he was just doing the dirty work because Parker violated kayfabe by getting up from his chair before his name was called. Abby gave Parker tremendous head shots with the kendo stick. Parker got out of the dressing room onto the stage and Abby attacked him again and tried to go to the ring to be Jack's partner but the refs wouldn't let him. Steamboat and Cactus did a hot open while Parker crawled from the stage to the ring. He was every bit as good with Steamboat working with Cactus as it was bad when Champion was in the ring. Finally Parker got to the ring, was immediately tagged in, and quickly pinned by Steamboat's flying body press. 1½ star. 7. Sting and Abdullah the Butcher defeated Bobby Eaton and Brian Pillman in 5:37 when Sting pinned Eaton with a flying body press. This was pretty exciting from start to finish. Abdullah attacked Sting before the match and Pillman made the save. It broke down to Abby versus Pillman and Sting versus Eaton for a while. Actually, Sting and Eaton were in the entire match, although Pillman did do a big splash on Abby. Sting did a great dive on Eaton. Abby kept attacking Sting throughout the match. Cactus came out and hit Abdullah with the kendo stick when Sting ducked, then Sting flew onto Eaton while Pillman kept Abdullah from breaking up the pin that would cause Pillman's team to lose. After the match, Abdullah and Cactus brawled to the dressing room, which under normal circumstances would make me believe that one of them is about to turn. But since we're not talking about a normal promotion that does things to lead to something else and instead one that just runs angles to fill time and forgets about them 15 seconds later, who really knows? 3¼ stars. 8. Big Van Vader and Mr. Hughes beat Rick Steiner and Night Stalker, Ryan Clark, in 5:06 when Vader splashed Stalker. It's been a long time since I've seen someone blow a big splash spot, but Stalker nearly did. Rick Steiner was great doing power moves on both big guys, and particularly worked well with Vader with stiff shots back and forth. Stalker tagged in and was lost and was pinned at the same time Steiner hit a bulldog off the top rope on Hughes. 1¾ stars. 9. Scott Steiner and Chip the Firebreaker beat Arachneman and Johnny B. Bad in 11:16 when Scott pinned Brad with an over-the-head belly-to-belly suplex. This match went too long for being this late in the show. Some spots were good but it really dragged. 1¼ stars. 10. Ron Simmons and Thomas Rich beat Steve Armstrong and PN News in 11:44 when Simmons pinned Armstrong with a spinebuster slam. Armstrong really tried to make it a good match, but there was nothing to interest anyone with at this point, and again they went too long for a match this late in the show. 3/4 star. 11. Lex Luger and Sting won Ring 1 and 2 respectively in the 2-ring Battle Royal. Battle Royals suck on pay-per-view. A Royal Rumble is usually good because not so many are in the ring at once, so they can work spots and you can follow the action. But traditional Battle Royals don't make good television, particularly when action is going on in 2 rings simultaneously. Clearly there was a substantial amount of good action, most of it outside the ring when 2 workers like, say Steamboat and Anderson, decided to get out of the ring and do something without everyone else getting in the way, but it was pretty bad overall. Luger ended up being the last one left in the first ring. In the second ring the final 4 were Rude, Austin, Sting, and Steamboat. Austin went out, then Rude and Steamboat went out simultaneously. Rude threw Steamboat over, Steamboat pulled himself up, then grabbed a head scissors on Rude and flipped him over while hanging on. As Steamboat tried to flip himself back in the ring, Rude, from the floor, pulled him out in 17:37. An interesting trivia note is that the final 2 men left in Ring 1 were Luger and Vader, both heels, and both holding the respective world titles of WCW in the United States and the IWGP World title of Japan. Vader captured the IWGP belt from Tatsumi Fujinami 1 week earlier in Bremen, Germany. 1/2 star, the final spot was good enough to elevate it from a dud. 12. Sting threw Luger out in 6:29 to win the Battle Royal. Luger dominated early since Rude gave Sting a rude awakening before the match started. Sting made his comeback and Harley Race took 2 perfect form bumps before Sting tossed Luger over to win. While some may complain about the obvious predictability of the finish, it pretty well had to be this way since Luger has most of the next 2 months off and they had to do something ending the show to set up the Luger-Sting match at the next pay-per-view. 2¾ stars. Notes: I've always thought the blind draw tag match gimmick is a great one for a special television show or a clash because it's an easy way to set up new angles between partners or rivals drawn blindly. I was against it on pay-per-view from the start because of a lack of specific matchups to sell the event. Even though the buy rate may not be as bad as the last pay-per-view because right after Christmas seems to be the perfect time to run a pay-per-view. We'll see in a few days, because my gut feeling is the buy rate won't have been very good. However, none of the teased dream matchups such as Steiner vs. Steiner, Sting and Rude as a team, etc. took place. The closest thing was Free Bird vs. Free Bird, which nobody was exactly clamoring for or dreaming about. No real new angles were started that I could tell, other than Taylor working as a face and promptly doing a clean job, and maybe Cactus vs. Abdullah, but it was never referred to again, so who even knows. There is a lot of very good talent in this company, but with the exception of the Luger and Anderson vs. Tank and Taylor tag team match, none of the good workers was put in a match that allowed them to showcase their ability. Abdullah showcased his unique ability to be sure, but Pillman was wasted in a match where he never tagged in and where it would have been perfect since the guy would never get into Haida Hammer, Champion News, Kazmayer, Bagwell or whomever in that spot, and they'd have been just as effective and would have had just as good a match, and Pillman could have been put in opposite Liger and they could have had a 4-star tag team match. Looking back at the Observer of 2 weeks ago, In a legit blind draw, the matches put together had more potential than the lineup that they worked on putting together to give the best possible action. Even though this card lasted the same 2 hours, 47 minutes that every WCW pay-per-view show does, it seemed too long. A good card of that length often seems too short, so it isn't the time as much as the card I can recall being at STARRCADE 86 in Greensboro, which lasted 4.5 hours and wasn't 1 minute too long because almost every match was great, and they needed that much time so as not to shortchange any of the good matches. 10 matches was too many because the last 2 just seemed like you wanted to get them over with and get to the Battle Royal, which within 2 minutes you also wanted to get over with. The lineup for the January 21st Clash of the Champions from Topeka, Kansas, which will be 2 days after the WWF Royal Rumble pay-per-view, has been put together as follows. Main event is Sting and Steamboat vs. Rude and Austin. Also Rhodes and Barry Windham and Simmons vs. Anderson and Eaton and Zbyszko, Steiners vs. Vader and Hughes, Hammer vs. Cactus Jack, News vs. Page, Morton vs. Bad Pillman and Patriots. I know Patriots are supposed to be off television for 60 days, but who has a calendar? Versus Pistols and Stud and Taylor vs. Rich. This will apparently set up the February 29th Milwaukee pay-per-view show, in which the top 3 matches will be Sting vs. Luger, Steamboat vs. Rude and Anderson, and Eaton vs. Rhodes and Windham. If they can get Liger vs. Pillman as well, they'll probably have a great show. The complete lineup for the WWF's January 19th Royal Rumble in Albany, New York, aside from the 30-man Rumble-style Battle Royal to determine the WWF champion, will consist of Legion of Doom vs. Natural Disasters for the tag team title, Bret Hart vs. the Mountie for the Intercontinental title, Bushwhackers with Jameson vs. Beverly Brothers with the Genius and the Orient Express, Pat Tanaka and Kato vs. the New Foundation, Owen Hart and Jim Neidhart. Both Pat Tanaka and Jimmy Snuka, and perhaps 1 or 2 others, are being brought back for this card as a one-time deal since they are mainly working independently. Former pro wrestling great Wilbur Snyder passed away on Friday in Broward County Hospital in Fort Lauderdale at the age of 62. Snyder had been hospitalized for the past week when he was diagnosed as having lymphatic leukemia, which weakened him to where he passed away from heart failure. Snyder, who was a major babyface superstar and perennial world title contender from the mid-1950s through the late 1960s, was nicknamed the world's most scientific wrestler. Snyder, born September 15, 1929, grew up in Carmel, Indiana, where he lettered in football, track and gymnastics in high school. Snyder was a star offensive tackle at the University of Utah, where he played with eventual pro wrestlers Joe Tangaro and Guy Bernetti. After college, he went to the NFL's Los Angeles Rams in 1952 and on to the Canadian Football League's Edmonton Eskimos in 1953, where he was a teammate of Gene Kineski and Joe Blanchard. He turned down a $12,000 per year deal, that was big money for a football player in those days, to return to the Eskimos for the 1954 season because of the money he made during the off-season wrestling in Southern California, where he was trained by Shandor Sabo and Warren Bockwinkel and became part of a Young Lions tag team with Nick Bockwinkel, who was using wrestling to work his way through UCLA at the time, on the Pacific Coast. At 6'2" and 230 pounds, which was a big man in those days and considered exceptionally agile for his size, Snyder was known for his drop kicks and his abdominal stretch finisher. His fast rise in pro wrestling was likened to that of Jack Briscoe more than a decade later, in that his athletic ability was a class above most of the wrestlers of his era, and promoters and fans saw it immediately. He became a national superstar from a television match against then NWA World Champion Lou Thesz on January 15, 1955. Thesz was scheduled for a television match against Big Bill Miller, but for some reason Miller didn't appear, and the unknown in the Midwest Snyder filled the bill. Instead of being squashed by Thesz, Snyder had the champ on the run throughout the match and went to a 30-minute draw. A series of title matches around the Midwest drew sellout crowds, including a famous 90-minute draw on March 25, 1955. The impact of the 90-minute draw was such that when Thesz held the title from 1963-66, he and Snyder drew many big houses again, building the grudge off the legend of the match. "We made a lot of money together," remembered Thesz. "He had the crew cut and was a football player, and he really had it. He had good reflexes and learned to be a good performer quickly. We ran the feud all over the country, usually stretching it to 3 meetings in each city, and sold out in a lot of cities that usually didn't do business." Snyder held the U.S. Championship several times in the late 1950s, feuding with the likes of Hans Schmidt and even pinning Vern Gagne on television, which gave him the moniker of the world's most scientific wrestler. Snyder's biggest feud of the 1960s was against Kineski, with them playing up the fact both were football teammates. When Kineski was NWA champion 1966 to 1969, Snyder was considered his top rival, and the two drew several sellouts in the Midwest. During that same period, Snyder was a top star in the Orient as well, forming a regular tag team with Danny Hodge, which included a stint as international tag team champions, both winning and losing the title back in matches against Antonio Inoki and Giant Baba for the Old Japanese Wrestling Alliance. He settled down in the early 1970s, mainly wrestling in the Chicago-Indianapolis area, generally as the Old World Wrestling Association's number 2 babyface behind Dick the Bruiser. He held both the WWA singles and tag team titles numerous times during the 1970s. He bought into the Indianapolis office, which he co-owned with Bruiser. With Bruiser as the top singles star in Indianapolis, Snyder generally formed a tag team in Indiana with other babyfaces and traded the tag team titles back and forth with whatever heel team was in the area throughout the 1970s. He pretty well wound down his career by 1981 but wrestled as late as 4 or 5 years later, and sold his portion of the office to Bruiser in 1983, at which point he retired and split his time between homes in Indiana and in Florida. A couple of big changes going into this Saturday's combined New Japan WCW show at the Tokyo Egg Dome. Aside from Vader now being IWGP World Champion, so the Choshu vs Fujinami title unification match is now just for the greatest 18 Club World Martial Arts title, and Fujinami should win because I doubt he'll lose 2 big singles matches in a row like this, but with Choshu booking, one really can't predict who will win, and Vader will defend the IWGP title against El Gigante. The Antonio Inoki vs Tiger Jeet Singh match has been changed to Inoki vs Hiroshi Hashi. The Hashi story has gotten a great deal of mainstream press in the past few weeks since Inoki is still a member of Japanese parliament. Hashi went to parliament to challenge Inoki for the Dome, but since Inoki had already agreed to wrestle Singh, he told Hashi he needed to get Singh to agree to give Hashi the match. Hashi and Hiro Matsuda went to Singh's home in Toronto with some photographers and asked Singh to let him have his dream match against the legendary Inoki. Singh naturally refused. They ended in Singh's backyard shooting an angle where Singh hit Hashi from behind with a rifle and then he and his son threw him, Hashi was wearing a business suit, into a frozen lake. Matsuda had to drag Hashi out of the lake. This set up the second Jungle Death match on Ganryujima, an island in Japan, on December 18th. The match, with no spectators, in the jungle going until one man couldn't continue, lasted 71-24. Both men juicing heavily and them tearing the ring apart and setting a tent on fire among other things before Hashi won and Singh did a stretcher job. Ganryujima was the site of famous samurai fights in Japanese folklore hundreds of years ago, and the first Jungle Death match occurred in 1987 between Antonio Inoki and Masa Saito. Got a chance to see the tape of the combined SWS, WWF, PWF, EMLL show on December 12 from the Tokyo Egg Dome. A major correction. The spot described in the last issue of The Observer regarding the Hulk Hogan vs Genichiro Tenryu match where Tenryu was clotheslined to the floor similar to the 1983 Hogan vs Antonio Inoki match never happened. In fact, nothing even close to that happened during the match. In addition, Japanese sources dispute the 30,000 paid figure we had here last week, saying this was the easiest show ever to get free tickets to and that the majority of the 40,000 in attendance were freebies. Supposedly anyone going to Megame Super Optical's parent company of SWS, and the second largest eyeglass company in Japan, could get 10 free tickets to the Dome show, and that the day of the show it was easy to get free tickets to the card right in front of the Dome. Supposedly SWS wasn't even concerned about the live gate, just to make it look like a success by announcing 61,500 fans, but figures released by SWS, which appear to be heavily exaggerated, would dispute that story. SWS officials announced total proceeds from the card as being 760 million yen, approximately $5,850,000, with the breakdown being $4.62 million live gate, which would set an all-time pro wrestling record. Surely this isn't anywhere close to true. $230,000 for television rights, which sounds legit because the WOWOW channel is said to pay Akira Maeda roughly that amount per show for TV rights, $230,000 in corporate sponsorship revenue and $770,000 in gimmick sales. From the television show, here is a rundown on the various matches. 1. Masakatsu Funaki, PWF, beat Jerry Lightning Foot Flynn with a chicken wing submission in 5:18. This was mainly mat work with Funaki dominating and working toward submissions. It really looked out of place on card in which the main audience draw was to see Hulk Hogan and the Road Warriors. 1 star. 2. Ultimate Dragon Yoshihiro Asai pinned CMLL light heavyweight champion Jerry Estrada in a non-title match at 10:15 with a monkey suplex. Even though Dragon was masked, the announcers freely referred to him as Asai and he came out to Asai's ring entrance music. There were some spectacular spots, but they didn't work together as well as one would expect. Estrada did take an incredible suplex over the top rope and not only flew out of the ring but clear over the guardrail from the ring onto the press table. Asai did his out of the ring moonsault cleanly. The monkey suplex is doing a German suplex, then flipping over again into a cradle. 3 stars. 3. Ashura Hara and Davey Boy Smith beat Yoshiaki Yatsu and Haku in 1657. There was no heat for this match, which made it seem worse than it really was. Hara and Haku worked very stiff with each other, but every time Smith came in he went right to wrist holds and kept killing whatever little momentum had been built up. Smith pinned Haku with an inside cradle, but after the match Yatsu and Haku gave Smith a stuffed powerbomb and left him laying. 1 3/4 stars. 4. George and Shunji Takano beat the Rockers in 10:55. Not much heat here, although the pacing was fine. Finish saw Shawn Michaels have George Takano set up out on the mat. Marty Jannetty, who had been groggy, then climbed to the top rope for the finisher very slowly as Michaels looked disgusted. Finally Michaels just pushed Jannetty off the top rope and Takano got his knees up on the splash and rolled over and got the pin. They aired on television, Michaels giving Jannetty dirty looks, but the post-match breakup didn't air on television. 2 stars. 5. Ted DiBiase pinned Kerry Von Erich in 9:18. Again no heat, but Sherry Martel was very vocal, spending the whole match yelling insults at Von Erich. This match was worked as if it was a WWF house show match between these two, which is way too slow-paced and lacking in action for Japan. DiBiase was good considering the style they were working, but bad considering the place. Finish saw Von Erich put Sherry in the claw, DiBiase kneed him from behind and got the pin with a DDT. 1 star. 6. Naoki Sano pinned Rick Martel to become the first SWS WWF Junior Heavyweight Champion in 7:29. Martel is clearly off roids and his physique has made drastic changes since his WWF stint. Sano leapt off the top turnbuckle to the floor, doing a midair flip onto Martel. He also did a Liger dive from the ring to the floor with a midair flip, but hurt his ankle in the process. Aside from those 2 moves, there was nothing to this match. Martel used to be one of the best around, but he was well below average here. Sano won with a German suplex that wasn't well executed. 1 3/4 stars. 7. Yoshiaki Fujiwara beat Ishinriki via submission in 11:12. Fujiwara got a big pop for his entrance, only big crowd reactions were for Hogan, Tenryu, Warriors, Fujiwara and Asai. This match had more wrestling heat than anything on the card, even though they really didn't do a lot. But Fujiwara has tremendous charisma as a tough guy. He made this match very entertaining and the crowd went nuts for every spot. It just seemed like Fujiwara toyed with Ishinriki and then when he decided to, quick as a cat, put on a submission. 2.5 stars. 8. Road Warriors WWF beat Natural Disasters WWF to retain the WWF Tag Team titles in 9:15. Mel Phillips, who did the ring announcing for this card, I'm not sure if it's the ultimate in arrogance or what in having an American ring announcer introducing matches in English. There was no Japanese ring introduction for the matches that involved WWF wrestlers to a crowd in Tokyo. Could you imagine that if WCW did a pay-per-view show from New York and brought in 7 or 8 wrestlers from New Japan and in the bouts with the Japanese, they used their own ring announcer who introduced the matches in Japanese even though it was in front of an American crowd both live and on television? Announced Earthquake as Earthquake John Tenta and announced Legion of Doom as the Road Warriors because they are so well known in Japan by those names. This was similar to these teams' bouts in the US. Highlight was Tenta throwing Hawk on the press table so hard the table broke. Animal came in with the hot tag and they did a double back suplex on Typhoon and Hawk came off the top rope with a clothesline on Typhoon and Animal pinned him. Hawk press slammed Jimmy Hart over the top rope and dropped him on Tenta, who was on the floor. Road Warriors were still very much over, but the Disasters are the wrong opponents for them because they can't do their power moves on them. 1 star. 9. Hogan WWF pinned Tenryu SWS in 13:57. Phillips called Hogan the Immortal Hulk Hogan. Unlike every other WWF wrestler who worked exactly the same as if they were in the US, and generally to little or no crowd reaction because of it, Hogan totally changed his style to work a Japanese match. It wasn't a good match, but it was a very different Hogan match. He used lots of drop toe holds and front face locks and did work hard, but they worked a very slow pace. Both guys were drenched in sweat and were trying their hardest, but it was sluggish work most of the way and the crowd reaction to the match was just fair. There wasn't even much of a pop when Tenryu kicked out of the leg drop, although there was a big pop when Tenryu kicked out of the axe bomber, lariat. Hogan even did 2 enzouidris. Tenryu kicked out of a second leg drop but was hit with an enzouidri and 2 lariats. The place popped big for the finish. This was better than either Hogan-Undertaker match for wrestling, but didn't have nearly as exciting a finish as either Hogan-Undertaker match. 1 1/4 stars. If the Tokyo Dome show was nothing spectacular, but at least acceptable, Then it was worlds different from the bizarre set of circumstances on December 22 at Tokyo Sumo Hall for the UWFI's biggest card to date. After the first 6 matches, all of which were fine as worked shoots, came the 2 boxer versus wrestler main events, both of which reportedly turned out to be genuine shoots before a sellout crowd of 11,000 fans paying in excess of $750,000. In the first one, Billy Scott, a Nashville-based independent pro wrestler, faced James Waring, the International Boxing Federation World Cruiserweight Champion. The match, which had little action, went the full 10 3-minute rounds, with Scott being awarded a split decision by the judges. After the match, Waring protested long and loud. Waring, who had about a 7-inch height and 25-pound weight advantage, looked as if he'd destroy Scott. While he did manage to tag Scott a few times, Scott managed to take Waring down several times, and by the 4th round it was the boxer who was running out of gas. Scott was apparently well-schooled in amateur wrestling, so he could take Waring down, but not in submission style, because with Waring's long arms and legs, he nearly always could reach the ropes before Scott could put any damage on him or finish him off. But that was nothing compared to the circumstances of the Nobuhiko Takada vs. Trevor Berbick, former world heavyweight boxing champ, match, or non-match. After about 90 seconds of dancing around, Takada unleashed about a dozen kicks to Berbick, 39, who simply left the ring and never came back. Berbick complained to anyone who spoke English before the fight about how he wanted low kicks banned, but couldn't get the rules changed. Takada unleashed a hard shot to Berbick's hamstring almost immediately, and since Berbick had never been in that predicament, his reaction caused him to drop his guard, and Takada nailed him with a kick to the head. Berbick then panicked and simply left the ring as his leg cramped up. A near riot occurred when it was announced that Takada was the winner at 2:52 of the first round, with fans throwing chairs, cups and bottles all over the building and chanting "yellow" and "coward" before Takada finally made a speech to somewhat quell things before it became a riot. Apparently at best there was some sort of communication problem with Berbick, although the Japanese are claiming he simply took the money, $76,683.97, and ran. The card was taped for an eventual pay-per-view airing in the United States, not as pro wrestling, but as mixed martial arts matches, for U.S. consumption, with Luthez doing the announcing, which supposedly would build toward introduction of UWF-style mixed matches to the U.S. through Braverman Boxing Promotions. As it turned out, just a few days later, Berbick made the news in the U.S. when he was arrested for grand theft and mortgage fraud stemming from his taking out a $95,000 loan, using his estranged wife's house as collateral but using a woman to pose as his estranged wife to co-sign. When he defaulted on the loan, the plan flopped when bank officials realized the woman who owned the house wasn't the same woman Berbick brought in. As it turns out, Berbick is already on probation for assaulting a former business manager, but was acquitted on kidnapping and aggravated assault in the same case, and has charges pending of raping a 26-year-old babysitter. John Muse tabulated all of the 4-star matches that have either been reported in The Observer or that he's seen between January and November of 1991, and by promotion, All Japan had 30, All Japan Women had 29, New Japan had 13, WCW had 10, WWF had 7, TWA had 5, SWS had 3, Ande MLL had 2. Wrestlers involved in the most during that time period were 1. Toshiaki Kawada, 16-2. Mitsuharu Misawa, 15-3. Jumbo Tsuruta and Kenta Kobashi, 14-5. Masafuchi, Bull Nakano, Akira Hokuto and Kyoko Inoue, 11-9. Akira Tao, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Asia Kong, Bison Kimura and Manami Toyota, 10. The top 10 North Americans were Rick Steiner, Cactus Jack, Steve Williams, Scott Steiner, Sting, Terry Gordy, Dan Crawford, Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair, Brian Pillman, and Eddie Gilbert. The December 13 issue of 3 Count had a story detailing the proposed bill to regulate pro wrestling in the state of Florida. A vote on whether or not the bill will be approved is scheduled for mid to late January. The newsletter said that Linda McMahon, co-owner of Titan Sports, was expected to testify against regulation at the January hearing. Several Florida independent promotions are scheduled to have representatives opposing the bill as well, while World Championship Wrestling is not expected to send anyone to the hearing. Among the regulations proposed in the bill were a 5% tax on gross receipts from live gates, pay-per-view events and closed-circuit telecasts purchased in Florida, non-refundable license fees for announcers, booking agents, managers, referees, wrestlers and timekeepers, not to exceed $100 per person against $250 in the case of booking agents. An increase in a promoter's security bond from $3,000 to $5,000. Promoters must pay for an ambulance and 2 emergency medical technicians to be on hand for the duration of a show. Promoters must also provide a ringside physician at every match, and each participant must be examined within 12 hours of their match to determine their health and well-being. Promoters must pay for each wrestler to have a minimum of $2,500 in insurance coverage for medical, surgical and hospital care stemming from injuries incurred during a match. No wrestler past the age of 45 can be licensed unless they are pronounced physically fit by a physician. Performers are banned from touching or threatening a referee. Action is banned outside the ring or on the ring apron. Wrestlers must register a fictitious or assumed ring name with the commission prior to match time. The commission's representative may order a promoter to withhold monies payable to a participant if there appears to be collusion to fix, alter or influence the outcome of the match. Wrestlers are prohibited from participating in more than one match within a 24-hour period. The commission must be allowed to suspend the license of any promoter who has consistently failed to make matches between participants of similar ability and skill. Anyone under the age of 18 is prohibited to be licensed. Refunds are to be granted upon the postponement of the main event or substitution of either main event participant. Failure to do so will result in a penalty of suspension of the promoter's license. No promoter shall advertise or continue to advertise that one or more participants will perform when such is not the case. The license of any promoter who continues this practice after a warning by the commission shall be suspended or revoked. Drug testing is called for, but anabolic steroids are not specifically mentioned nor have penalties been established. It's really too bad that the original points brought up in the hearing, mainly the anabolic steroid problem in wrestling and false advertising, which had people like me supporting regulation, were expanded upon and a set of many unworkable regulations are being proposed. If there are to be random drug tests, then there does need to be licensing fees for wrestlers, so the commission can gain a list of those performing in the state to computerize the random tests. But I can't see the point or need for regulating announcers, referees, or timekeepers. I'm not against the increase in the security bond, particularly because of some of the antics of unscrupulous promoters. Obviously, requiring an ambulance and 2 technicians is complete overkill. There are claims that the insurance coverage is unworkable given the economics of independent wrestling gates. Obviously, barring touching or threatening a referee is ridiculous given what pro wrestling is, as is barring action on the apron or out of the ring. It's one thing to ban action in the stands amongst the spectators because it can lead to injuries, but quite another to ban action on the floor, particularly if the spectators are separated from the participants with barricades. Obviously, there is no such thing as pro wrestling as we know it without collusion to influence the outcome, and there is no way that section can be part of any bill unless the government is simply trying to enact totally unenforceable regulations. Prohibiting wrestlers from competing more than once in 24 hours, as mentioned here before, would make it impossible for a major promotion to hold television tapings, in which guys often work more than once per show, or schedule afternoon and evening shows with the same wrestlers. The idea behind this is to keep promoters from using a wrestler on a show and then putting a mask on him and bringing him out as a supposed different wrestler on the same show and deceive customers from knowing it's a guy who they have already seen. My thoughts is that while this regulation does more harm than good, perhaps there should be a regulation where promotions must in their advertising indicate when a show is a television taping and that wrestlers may appear more than once on these shows. While WCW almost always to my knowledge plugs when they are doing television tapings and local promos, WWF policy is not to do so. As for the false advertising, obviously regulation is needed in that area, but it's ridiculous to think a commission is going to ban a major promoter who constantly violates that statute, because that would eliminate the commission's 5% tax on future gates, so that rule in reality would probably never be enforced. Instead, a series of progressively steeper fines should be enacted along with specific rules requiring mandatory announcements of changes in the card and updating advertising within reason given the realities of time considerations when it comes to changes in the shows. This is the second issue of the current set. Because next week's issue will be a double issue, it means that if you've got A1 on your current address label, your Observer subscription will expire with next week's issue. In response to many questions, we will not be doing a yearbook this year, but we'll be doing the biggest yearbook ever, our 10-year anniversary issue at the end of 1992. The results of the awards balloting will be released over a 4-week period, starting with next week's Observer. Subscription rates remain $6 for 4 issues, $12 for 8, $24 for 16, $36 for 24, $48 for 32 up through $60 for 40 issues within the United States and Canada. Overseas rates for weekly airmail delivery remain $9 for each set of 4 issues through $90 for 40 issues. All subscription renewals, letters to the editor, arena results and reports, news items and any other correspondence should be sent to the Wrestling Observer newsletter, P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 950091228. Fax messages can be sent to the Observer at 408-378-6562 afternoon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, time on a daily basis. EMLL. December 20th at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City saw Moguer and Huracan Sevilla and Apollo Dantes win 2 out of falls from Espectro Jr. and Hombre Bala and Leo del Gladiador 2 stars, Blue Demon Jr. and Leo de Solitario and Mano Negra won 2 out of 3 falls from Sultan Gargola and Commando Russo and Grand Sheik Dud. Anibal and Volador and Misterioso beat Nitron and Fuerza Guerrera and Pierroth Jr. via DQ when Guerrera hit Misterioso with a low blow 1 star. You just can't believe how bad Nitron was, and finale saw Conan and Dandy and Atlantis beat Los Brazos in 2 out of 3 falls 2 stars. The final suicide match on December 15th in Monterrey, which saw rivals Fuerza Guerrera and Octagon team up against Leo del Santo and Leo de Black Shadow, with the losing team then having to wrestle one another, and the loser of that match gets unmasked did, as expected, wind up with Black Shadow losing his hood. They had a unification match with CMLL light heavyweight champion Jerry Estrada versus NWA champ Lizmark on December 15th in Arena, Mexico, which went to a draw. On the same card, Masacre beat MS1 in a hair versus hair match. Los Brazos won a non-title match from CMLL Trios champions the New Infernales, Satanico and MS1 and Pirata Morgan. On December 12th at Arena Coliseo, and Oro and Plata kept their Mexican tag team titles, going to a draw with Tony Arce and Vulcano. El Egipcio retained his Mexican heavyweight title, beating Rayo de Jalisco Jr. on December 8th at Arena, Mexico. Tony Arce and Vulcano regained the Mexican tag team title on December 17th at Arena Coliseo from Oro and Plata. December 27th Arena Coliseo card headlined by Conan and Canadian Vampire Casanova, and Dandy vs. MS1 and La Fiera and Chacho Herides. Big Show December 29th in Guadalajara has Conan and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Dos Caras vs. Cien Caras and Satanico and Pero Aguayo. Huracan Sevilla won a hair versus hair match from Commando Russo on December 8th at Arena Coliseo. The CMLL middleweight tournament started on December 18th and has been continuing every Wednesday night in Acapulco. Last week Ovaciones had an article on the history of masks in pro wrestling. It said the first masked man was James. It's on November 7, 1933 in Fort Worth, Texas. Masks gained fame in the United States a few weeks later when the Masked Marvel debuted in Madison Square Garden. The first masked wrestler in Mexico was Luis Núñez in 1934, who simply went under the name The Masked Man. The most successful early foreign masked man was Jack Gorman, who debuted in 1936 as the Masked Man from Chicago, and masks became the calling card of lucha libre due to the popularity of El Santo, who donned the white mask in 1942. The Parks and Rec Department in the Mexico City suburb of Coyoacán has announced plans to build a museum of lucha libre. UWA. Connect retained the UWA heavyweight title on December 13th, and Netzahualcoyot winning 2 out of 3 falls from Coquina. This group will start promoting weekly house shows in Cancun in January. Enrique Vieira kept the junior heavyweight title, beating Dr. Wagner Jr. on December 17th in Pachuca. Bam Bam Bigelow debuts here on February 16th, while Chris Benoit and Canadian Tiger, Mike Lazenski, start January 12th, and Buffalo Allen, Bad News Allen, starts January 29th. December 22nd at El Torreo in Naucalpan saw Mil Mascaras and Enrique Vieira and Villano 3 beat Canek and Coquina and Fatu, Hijo del Santo and Tinieblas Jr. and Senior beat Negro Casas and Killer and Fishman. Rambo and Headhunters beat El Texano and Silver King and Gran Hamada. El Signo and Negro Navarro and Black Power beat Psicodelico and Solar Eye and Phantasma and Tamba and Celestial, formerly Blackman Eye, which has caused a lot of controversy because wrestlers losing a mask are forbidden under the Lucha Libre Code of coming back with a new mask, and Ninja Sasuke, Monkey Magic Wakita, beat Momotaro Masa Michinoku, and Black Terry and Jose Luis Feliciano. December 28th in Puebla headlined by Headhunters teaming with Casas vs. Santo and Hamada and Villano 3. Zulima kept the women's title, beating Martha Villalobos on December 15th in Mexico City. December 8th at El Torreo in Naucalpan saw Dos Caras and Canek and Villano 3 beat Coquina and Fatu and El Signo, Killer and Fishman and Wagner Jr. beat Vieira and Tinieblas Sr. and Jr., Transformer and Phantasma and Solar I beat Black Power and Rambo and Babyface, Tamba and Marlon and Villano I beat Cajos and El Indomito and El Engendro. Mil Mascaras and Canek had a rare match as tag team partners on December 17th in Querétaro against Coquina and Fatu. Salomon Grundy and his brother Aaron are headed here in late January. Leo del Santo vacated the WWA welterweight title. Santo, who holds the UWA welterweight title, was said to be looking to win the upcoming CMLL welterweight tournament when it takes place. Japan. Complete results of the December 22nd UWFI show at Sumo Hall saw Takada beat Berbick in 2:52 via countout. Scott beat Waring on a split decision. Kazuo Yamazaki beating Tatsuo Nakano via submission with a cross-arm lock in 13:23. Bob Backlund over Yoji Angio with the chicken wing submission in 11:26. Gary Albright knocked out Kiyoshi Tamura in 5:26. Yuki Miyato made Tom Burton submit to an arm lock in 7:50. Masahiro Kakihara beat Jim Boss in 4:03, and Vince Ross, a Canadian kickboxer, beat Makoto Oi via a second-round knockout. More than 100 reporters from around Japan attended this show, which is more than even attended the Hulk Hogan show at the Tokyo Dome. I'm not sure of all the circumstances, but Danny Spivey is no longer working for All Japan, and it appears that Johnny Ace will be taking Spivey's spot as Stan Hansen's regular tag team partner. All Japan will be doing an 8-team round-robin January tag team tournament with Jumbo Tsuruta and Masafuchi Mitsuharu Masawa, and Kena Kobashi, Hansen and Ace, Toshiaki Kawada and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Akira Tao, and Yoshinari Ogawa, Billy Black and Joel Deaton, Chris and Mark Youngblood and Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton. Most of the television shows taped on the January tour will involve those teams against one another. The January 10th taping in Kumamoto has Tsuruta and Fuchi and Ogawa versus Masawa and Kawada and Kikuchi plus Tao versus Hansen. January 12th in Fukuoka has Fuchi defending the PWF Junior Heavyweight title against Richard Slinger. January 15th at Korakuen Hall has Tsuruta and Tao versus Hansen in Deaton, Masawa versus Ace, Ogawa and Fuchi versus Kikuchi and Kawada and Kobashi versus Black. January 21st in Osaka will have 4 singles matches picked that night in the building, with the team winning the most matches being declared the winner, with teams being Masawa Kawada Kobashi Kikuchi versus Tsuruta Tao Fuchi Ogawa. A gathering of more than 500 fans over the weekend in Tokyo voted on bests in many categories. The fans voted Jumbo Tsuruta as the greatest wrestler of all time, and when asked to pick the ultimate dream match to draw the largest crowd ever in Japan, the match with the most votes was Tsuruta versus Akira Maeda, which tells you how over Maeda still really is. Dick Murdoch will return to Japan with the new Wing promotion in February, along with the Headhunters, Miguelito Perez, Waterman, Ricky Santana, and Gypsy Joe. SWS will have a tournament to crown SWS Tag Team Champions from January 5th to January 12th, with the teams being Genichiro Tenryu and Ashura Hara, George, and Shunji Takano Haku and Yoshiaki Yatsu, Kendo Nagasaki, and Kenichi Oya, Takashi Ishikawa and Samson Fuyuki, Naoki Sano and Davey Boy Smith and Shinichi Nakano and Tatsumi Kitahara. Also on the SWS tour will be the Berserker, Commando Russo, Bestia Salvaje, and Shawn Michaels. Coming in February will be Marty Jannetty, Smith, and Hercules. Akira Maeda's Rings has a show January 25th in Tokyo Bay NK Hall with Maeda versus Dirk Leon Frey on top, plus Rob Carmen, World Champion Kickboxer, versus Mystery Wrestler, Willie Wilhelm, for Olympic Judo medalist, versus Kalmykov Eagle, Soviet Samba Champion, and Norman Smiley versus Satoru Koba, another Soviet Samba champion. FMW opens January 5th at Korakuen Hall with Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto and Samba Asako versus Horace Boulder, and the Gladiator and Big Titan in a street fight, and Ricky Fuji versus the Sheik. January 6th at Korakuen Hall is a bunkhouse stampede. January 7th in Chiba is headlined by Goto versus Kevin Sullivan, and January 10th will be a no-ropes barbed wire death match with Onita versus Sheik, while the tour ends January 15th in Kyogo with Onita versus Titan for Onita's WWA World Martial Arts title, and Sheik and Gladiator versus Asako and Goto. Trivia question: who is the only wrestler that currently holds world title recognition from 3 different groups? The answer is Bill Apter's all-time favorite wrestler, Mil Mascaras. Mascaras holds the old IWA title of the non-existent organization and still defends the belt given to him from the 1975 Einhorn organization, holds the WWA title in Baja California in Mexico and the All-World title in Guatemala. JWP on December 7th at Korakuen Hall saw Harley Saito and Itsuki Yamazaki and Hikari Fukuoka beat Dynamite Kansai, formerly Miss A, and Eagle Sawai and Reiko Hoshino. Cutie Suzuki pinned Miki Handa to keep the JWP/UWA Women's Junior title, and Terry Power and Reggie Bennett beat Rumi Kazama and Mayumi Ozaki. New Japan Television taping on December 11th in Nagoya before a sellout 10,100 fans saw Kantaro Hoshino and Black Cat beat Katana and Hiro Saito, Osamu Kido and Kengo Kimura beat Kunyaki Kobayashi and Shiro Koshinaka, Masashi Aoyagi pinned Masanobu Kurisu, Masachono beat Kim Duke via submission, Norio Onaga pinned Negro Casas to keep the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title. Keiji Muto and Akira Nagami beat Bam Bam Bigelow and Tim Horner when Nagami pinned Horner in 1811. Tatsumi Fujinami pinned Jushin Liger in 1544 with 2 power bombs and a back suplex to keep the IWGP Heavyweight title, and Shinya Hashimoto and Scott Norton beat Riki Choshu and Masa Saito in 1649 when Hashimoto pinned Saito. A live television special on December 16 before a sellout 6,850 fans in Osaka saw Hiro Saito and Onaga over Hoshino and Kat, Kurisu and Duke beat Kobayashi, and Aoyagi, Kido and Kimura beat Masa Saito and Tony Halme. In what was billed as his debut as a pro wrestler, he's been doing a boxing gimmick, pinned Bigelow in 10 minutes. Liger pinned Casas, Fujinami and Chono beat Choshu and Nagami, and the main event saw Muto and Hiroshi Hazi keep the IWGP Tag Team titles, beating Norton and Hashimoto in 1949 when Muto pinned Hashimoto with the moonsault. The January 4 Tokyo Dome show will air live from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., which should be the top 4 or 5 matches. PWF is negotiating to bring in Roberto Duran for a mixed match against Yoshiaki Fujiwara. Originally they were going to use this match as the main event on the card in Miami, however Duran, for tax reasons, wants the match outside the United States. All Japan Women on January 4 at Korakuen Hall has Kyoko Inoue vs Akira Hokuto for the IWA title in one of those die and go to heaven matches that won't be taped for television or home video. Manami Toyota vs Toshio Yamada, Bull Nakano and Bat Yoshinaga vs Asia Kong and Bison Kimura, Yumiko Hata and Suzuka Minami vs Seiki Hasegawa and Debbie Malenko in prelims. The January 5 TV taping has Kong and Kimura defending the WWA Tag Team titles against Kyoko Inoue and Yamada, who won the Tag Team tournament, Minami vs Nakano Toyota and Atsuko Mita vs Hokuto and Mima Shimoda, Takako Inoue and Mariko Yoshida defend the Japanese Tag Team titles against Malenko and Hasegawa and Yoshinaga vs Hata. All Japan Women's 1991 awards were MVP Nakano Match of the Year, Nakano vs Inoue September 7, Tag Team of the Year, Kong and Kimura, Rookie of the Year, Malenko. Kong Magazine's 10 Biggest News Stories in Japan of 1991. 1. UWF splits into 3 groups. 2. Koji Kao fired by SWS. 3. All Japan continues super business throughout the year. 4. Small independent FMW draws 2 crowds of more than 30,000 fans. 5. Masachono wins the singles tournament for New Japan in August. 6. Ashura Hara comes out of retirement for SWS. 7. Tatsumi Fujinami wins NWA title from Ric Flair. 8. Giant Baba returns to action after missing 6 months with a broken leg. 9. Wing Promotion forms, Ken Dynamite Kid retires and Yoshihiro Asai jumps from Universal to SWS. New Japan February tour will have Tony Halme getting a super push, Norton, Bigelow and Rambo from Europe. Oregon. Roddy Piper showed up on Portland television on December 21 and talked for 15 minutes about how much Don Owen helped him in his wrestling career. Piper was so sentimental, talking about how when other promoters tried to blacklist him out of the business, Owen gave him a job, and Owen, who was there when Piper was giving his speech, started to tear up. Piper said Owen was the kind of a guy who will still help out guys after they backstab him on the way out, and said that Owen has loaned money to several wrestlers to help them get started in new territories and often has never asked for the money back. Piper wound up throwing some money to the crowd and both thanked CH12, which ended its long run of airing Portland wrestling the next weekend, for carrying the show for so many years, and criticized them for dropping it. CH12 decided to run WWF Superstars of Wrestling in the time slot starting this coming Saturday night. Steve Dahl and the Grappler regained the Northwest Tag Team titles on December 20 in Eugene from Ron and Don Harris, but the next night the Harris brothers stole possession of the belts. Billy Jack Haynes is history once again. Why am I not surprised? Buddy Rose was brought back, at all of 375 pounds, as an emergency top singles heel to feud with Demolition Crush over the Pacific Northwest title. Rose came in on December 14 as a babyface, but during an interview threw powder in Crush's eyes in challenging him for a non-title match. Rose also said that he refused to wrestle on television unless the building was sold out. Well, there were plenty of empty seats the next week, and Rose was gloating about how the match would be off television when Owen said that Roddy Piper bought out all the empty seats, so the card was a sellout and they put the match on television. Rose won the match when ref Sandy Barr was bumped and the Harris brothers came out and put Ether on a towel and put Crush out. Rose has been going on television comparing himself to William Kennedy Smith and saying he's not guilty. Jesse Barr pinned Al Madrill, and after the match Madrill head-butted ref Sandy Barr to set up a match where Madrill wrestled Barr, and if Madrill loses, he had to dress up like Santa Claus and hand out candy to all the kids, and if Barr loses, then Sandy Barr had to put on a diaper, drink milk from a bottle and wear a baby bonnet. Dahl and Grappler beat Moondog Moretti and Dirty White Boy Bobby Blair. Harris brothers beat C.W. Bergstrom and Mike Winner. Brickhouse Brown beat Mike Miller via DQ, and Miller pile-drove him on a 2x4 to set up a board on a pole match. Former wrestler Joey Jackson appeared on television, and they announced the return of the Equalizer as a regular on Christmas, but it didn't materialize. Dahl gave awards to the television crew and to longtime sponsor Tom Peterson. Ch. 12 sent out form letters to everyone who wrote about the show being cancelled, saying that because of declining ratings it had become too expensive to cover production costs of the weekly shoot. December 25th in Portland saw a good crowd with kids free as winner beat Moretti via over-the-top rope DQ. Rambo beat Moretti, who subbed for Colonel De Beers, who came out and said the commission wouldn't let him wrestle, and it was an American conspiracy. The Jesse Barr vs. Madrill Stip match saw Madrill win by pinning Barr after a loaded headbutt, which meant Sandy had to wear a diaper. Sandy took off his pants and put a diaper on, a baby bottle in his mouth and a baby bonnet on. I've never heard of a babyface ref doing this humiliation gimmick to this degree. In the ensuing melee, the gimmick came out of Madrill's mask and they ended up putting the diaper, bonnet and bottle on Madrill. They also made him throw candy to the kids. Miller pinned Brown when De Beers distracted the ref and Miller put on a foreign object. The Crush vs. Rose title match saw the Harris brothers distract the ref and Rose pull out powder, but Crush kicked his hand. The power went in Rose's face and he was pinned. In the Doll and Grappler vs. Harris brothers cage match, with Don Owen getting to whip the Harris boys if they win, opened with Owen doing the ring announcing and saying that he hoped Doll and Grappler would win because these guys knocked my hearing aid loose and I didn't like it a bit. He also promised extra pay for Doll and Grappler if they were to win. They did. Owen then started whipping the Harris brothers hard with his belt. Rose then came in and hit Doll and Grappler both with chairs, so their Don Owen is in the ring with three heels converging on him as Rose unlocked the Harris brothers. Don then goes after Ron Harris, who is only about 6'6" and 280, and Don is only about 80 years old, and Harris shoved him down and Owen actually took a bump and got up and started yelling and screaming. December 28th for the final television show saw Doll and Crush and Grappler vs. Rose and Harris brothers. Was a great bout because Rose did everything in the world impossible for a 375-pound human being to do in a ring. Crush had Rose in the full Nelson when the Harris brothers hit Crush with a chair for the DQ to set up Crush vs. Don Harris. Miller vs. Brown ended with Miller winning again when Rose hit Brown with the 2x4 and the two whipped Brown with belts until Doll made the save. Brown really isn't over like he should be in Portland because fans make racist comments about him too. He's actually half booed. Also, Ron Harris beat Rambo, winner beat Madrill via DQ, and Barr beat Bergstrom. They've added a phone number to give the lineup since there is no more television, and are trying to build up a mailing list to send info on big shows out, and are trying to get a new time slot. Sandy Barr is now running weekly shows at Uncle Milt's Pizza in Vancouver, Washington, about 15 minutes from the Portland Sports Arena, every Sunday night, so the boys are guaranteed 3 nights of work each week, with Portland Saturday and Eugene Friday. They have local cable television in Vancouver and will be taping every Sunday for a Monday 5 p.m. air date. The December 29th show drew an SRO crowd of 600. Don Costa's the announcing and calls the renovated building the Parlor of Action. Grappler beat Bergstrom, Doll beat Moretti, Brown beat Miller via DQ when Miller tried to hang him with a noose over the ropes. Rose pinned Crush in a non-title match using a foreign object to set up a title match next week. Al Madrill pinned ref Sandy Barr in a mask versus hair match, but before they could cut Sandy's hair, they found the object in Madrill's mask and Madrill was unmasked, but the Harris boys covered his face so nobody could see Madrill bald, and the finale saw Harris brothers beat Art and Jesse Barr. Art has put on about 20 pounds of muscle. Global. December 20th at the Dallas Sportatorium drew 336 in a major rainstorm as Barry Horowitz drew Terry Daniels in a match where Horowitz had the match won all the way but continued to gloat until the tie limit expired, so he didn't get his second win. Eddie Gilbert beat Chris Michael, Chaz Taylor pinned Mike Davis, Tug Taylor beat Stephen Dane via DQ when Mike Davis interfered. Scott Putski pinned Dane, Dark Patriot. Doug Gilbert pinned Michaels. Eddie Gilbert DDQ Terry Garvin in the best match on the show, ending with a pull-apart brawl, and Bill Irwin and Black Bart and Rattlesnake won 2 out of 3 falls from Rod Price and John Tatum and Sweet Daddy Falcone when Falcone accidentally hit Tatum with the nunchucks and was pinned, and Tug Taylor pinned Mike Davis in a strap-on-a-pole match. Horowitz is now doing interviews claiming to sell the historic videotape of his only win for $49.95. GWF announcer Craig Johnson has signed up in January to be the lead announcer for the Major Indoor Lacrosse League on the Prime Network. The December 27th show drew GWF's best crowd to date, 1,400, and was its best overall card to date as well. Gary Young pinned Billy Joe Travis in a babyface match. Jerry Lynn won the GWF light heavyweight title from Lightning Kid in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Airs January 14th on ESPN for those of you keeping track of important things like this, and was said to have been one of the 2 best matches in Dallas of 1991, the other being the Jushin Liger vs. Brian Pillman match the previous night at Reunion Arena. Eddie Gilbert beat Terry Garvin in 2 out of 3 falls to keep the TV title. Gilbert was searched by fans before the match who found several foreign objects on him. One of the searchers was called Sam Boswell, who was Sam Lowe, who was Gilbert's manager in Memphis. Gilbert won the 3rd fall by throwing fire. They are going to run an angle with ref James Beard, as he did an interview after the match and said he knew about Gilbert's trick and he was assigning himself to ref all of Gilbert's matches from this point forward. Patriot kept the North American title, beating Scott Anthony via DQ in the third fall when Anthony hit the ref, and after the match Dark Patriot sprayed blue ink in Patriot's eyes, and the finale saw Irwin and Bart win the GWF tag titles from Tatum and Price in 2 out of 3 falls when Irwin hit Price with his horseshoe. January 3rd at the Sportatorium has Tug Taylor vs. Dark Patriot, Bullpain vs. Sam Houston with both Samantha and Baby Doll handcuffed to Craig Johnson, Dane vs. Putski, Lynn defends the light heavyweight title against Chaz Taylor, Bart and Irwin defend the GWF tag titles against Gilbert and Horowitz, who will be the inaugural member of the revived First Family, and Davis Brothers vs. Chaz and Tug Taylor in a strap-on-a-pole match. USWA. Booker Eric Embry took a few weeks off to go home for Christmas, so they did an angle where Tom Pritchard gave him 5 pile drivers. December 28th in Memphis saw Coco War beat Tony Williams, Tony Anthony beat Don Bass, Brian Christopher, who turned heel on television on December 21st, beat Candyman, Reggie B. Fine, Bart Sawyer beat Doug Masters in a strap-on-a-pole match, Tom Pritchard and Miss Texas beat CJ and Tony Falk, Moondogs beat Jeff Jarrett and Robert Fuller to keep the tag titles, and in a double elimination tournament with the winner to get a title shot at Kimala next week, Jerry Lawler beat Jeff Gaylord, Lawler beat Sandman, Gaylord beat Lawler, Gaylord beat Sandman and Lawler beat Gaylord to win the tournament. December 29th in Louisville saw Sawyer beat Masters in a strap-on-a-pole match, Christopher beat Candyman, Pritchard and Texas beat Falk and CJ, Lawler beat Sandman, Anthony beat Falk and Moondogs beat Jarrett and Fuller via DQ. In most cities on the circuit they are recognizing Lawler as champion, but in Memphis they are recognizing Kimala. Christopher Brian Lawler turned on former partner Tony Williams and said in his interview that "I'm nobody's job boy here and there." Former Stampede Wrestling manager Abu Wizzle is promoting what is billed as the return of Stampede Wrestling to the Calgary Pavilion on December 27, although there is no involvement of the Hart family. The first show was to be headlined by Bad News Allen vs. Steve DeSalvo and Jerry Morrow, and Gama Singh vs. Ben Bassarab and Phil LaFleur, Dan Crawford in All Japan. The rent for the building is $2,200 per night, which is why nobody has tried to return to the building for weekly matches since Stu Hart closed up the territory. If the first show draws a crowd, they are talking about running shows every other Friday night. December 21st in Bremen, Germany, before a crowd of 10,000 fans saw Tony St. Clair beat Greg Valentine via DQ. David Taylor and Chris Benoit won the Catch Wrestling Association tag team titles from Miles Zerno and Franz Schumann in 37 minutes in a babyface match. Very good. David Finlay ended Steve Wright's 100-year reign as CWA middleweight champion with a 9th-round pin. Good match with the normally babyface Wright working as the heel. Big Van Vader pinned Tatsumi Fujinami in 22 minutes with a power slam to win the IWGP World Heavyweight title. Excellent match. And Rambo retained the CWA title by pinning Ken Patera in the 8th round. Terrible match mainly because of Patera. Thanks to everyone who listened and joined in this past Thursday night on Sports Byline USA. I've got a funny story about that show that happened off the air. Host Ron Barr said he wanted me to do the show every 3 months and apologized for not having me on sooner during what was a 1991 just filled with wrestling news. Barr said that Vince McMahon bought a sponsorship deal on Sports Byline USA specifically with the condition that I not be allowed on the show again. Barr said that he'd received so many requests to have me back on, and naturally that was the end of the sponsorship. January 17th in Tampa for CWF/Suncoast Pro Wrestling combined show before 140 fans saw Dean Malenko beat Rico Federico, Jumbo Beretta beat Alan Iron Eagle, and Debbie Malenko beat Pink Easy. Joel Goodhart has a television taping scheduled for January 27th in Philadelphia, and Talk is Healed tape TV every 3rd week. No word on where the tapes will run. Blackjack Mulligan, as a manager, and Kendall Windham, as a wrestler, will be appearing on Eddie Mansfield's next IWF tapings. Kurt Bayer, son of legendary Dick the Destroyer Bayer, will make his pro debut working for Don Owen in Oregon next month. Ike January 19th in Tampa before 150 fans saw Federico beat Tommy Starr, Rocky Johnson beat Canadian Bad Boys, Star Riders beat Kenny Kendall and Jerry Flynn, Iron Eagle beat Robert Fuller via DQ, Johnny Ace pinned Beretta. Suncoast Pro Wrestling January 20th in Palmetto, Florida saw Dean Malenko and Beretta beat Superstar, Bob Cook, and Federico. Eddie Sharkey's PWA drew 1,350 fans on December 22nd in Minneapolis at the Indian Center, headlined by Charlie Norris beating Randy Gusto. LPWA canceled its December 28th taping in Panama City, Florida at the last minute due to a lack of money. Torberg is now again looking for new investors. Chris Love had been in Panama City for several weeks passing out thousands of free tickets. Supposedly they are still planning a February pay-per-view show, although no television building up to such a show has been taped. Iqua on December 26 in Tampa drew 250 as Kenny Kendall beat Jim Steele, Sullivan beat Tommy Starr, Mark Starr beat Coconut Man in a lumberjack match, Terminators double count out Ron Slinker and Federico to keep their U.S. Tag Team titles, Jimmy Backlund beat Pat Tanaka to win the World Light Heavyweight title when Tex Sellinger interfered, and Johnny Ace pinned Dick Slater to become the initial Florida champion. Among those attending the show were Tarzan Goto from Japan, and Chaz and Tug Taylor, who said they were headed in. December 28 at Malenko's wrestling camp in Tampa saw Cody Wade draw with Big V over the Southern title. WWF. Slick was back on primetime as a babyface. Sid Justice is scheduled to return at television tapings next week in Florida. Jesse Ventura has filed a lawsuit against Vince McMahon. Ventura's suit is regarding using Ventura's announcing work on recent mini pay-per-view shows, airing old matches of Hogan, for instance, or WM matches where Ventura did the announcing, and Coliseum videotape releases. Ventura is claiming Titan never had the rights to use his commentary except on agreed-upon pay-per-view events just for the event on specifically on Superstars of Wrestling television show. Top matches from the December 14th show at Aloha Stadium in Honolulu before 18,000 saw Genichiro Tenryu pin Haku, Kerry Von Erich over Kabuki, Nasty Boys beat Rockers, Jimmy Snuka pinned Rick Martel, Roddy Piper beat Ted DiBiase, Legion of Doom beat Natural Disasters and Hulk Hogan over Ric Flair via countout. December 28th in Cleveland saw Chris Chavez beat Kato, Sergeant Slaughter beat General Adnan and Colonel Mustafa, Undertaker over Jim Duggan, Legion of Doom Animal pinned Typhoon, Randy Savage beat Jake Roberts via DQ, Warlord pinned Chris Walker, Virgil beat Repo Man via DQ and Nasty Boys beat Rockers. December 26th in Hershey, Pennsylvania saw Walker beat Brooklyn Brawler, Virgil beat Repo Man via DQ, Slaughter beat Mustafa, and Adnan, Animal pinned Typhoon, Warlord pinned Greg Valentine, Nasty Boys beat Bushwhackers, Tito Santana drew DiBiase and Hogan beat Flair via DQ. December 26th in Toronto saw Savage and Duggan beat Undertaker and Roberts when Savage pinned Roberts, Beverly Brothers beat Rockers, Bret Hart pinned Jacques Rougeau, Big Boss Man pinned IRS, Berserker pinned British Bulldog, Chavez pinned Kato and Von Erich pinned Skinner. December 26th at the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland saw Walker pin Brawler, Warlord pinned Valentine, Nasty Boys beat Bushwhackers, Virgil beat Repo Man via DQ, Slaughter beat Adnan and Mustafa, Santana drew DiBiase, Animal pinned Earthquake and Hogan beat Flair via countout. December 15th in Pittsburgh drew 2,500 as Santana pinned Kato, Genius and Beverly Brothers beat Bushwhackers and Jim Neidhart, Hart pinned Mountie, IRS DDQ Bossman, Virgil pinned Skinner, Slaughter beat Mustafa, and Adnan and Duggan and Savage beat Undertaker and Roberts. December 29th at Madison Square Garden drew 11,000 as Hercules pinned Valentine 3 stars, Virgil beat Repo Man via DQ 2 stars, Skinner pinned Jim Powers 3/4 star, Nasty Boys beat Bushwhackers 2 stars, Hart drew DiBiase over 1905 3 stars, Slaughter beat Mustafa and Adnan dud, Bulldog pinned Berserker 1/2 star, Walker pinned Brawler dud and Hogan beat Flair via countout 3¼ stars. WCW. Jushin Liger won the light heavyweight title on December 25th at the Omni from Brian Pillman in a match that Scott Hudson called perhaps the best live match he's ever seen that didn't involve Ric Flair. Reports are Liger and Pillman were at or around 4 stars every night during the week, although the reaction for Liger varied. In New York he was over huge and he and Pillman were given a standing ovation after their match. In Dallas he was booed as a heel even though it was a 4+ star match. In Atlanta the crowd reacted after 2 minutes, much like a Japanese crowd in cheering for both men. NBC TV's George Michael Sports Machine on Sunday night aired clips of Liger during their 1991 sports highlight rundown and called him the most outstanding wrestler in the world of 1991. Cactus Jack took a bump down a flight of stairs that will air on an upcoming WCW Pro show. Crowds were up Christmas week with the loaded lineups in every city. The reason they did the television angle where PN News had his eye run into the ring post by Mr. Hughes was because News had returned from England with a swollen shut eye courtesy of an altercation in a bar from Rick Rude. News couldn't beat Rude with both arms against one in arm wrestling and things got out of hand. In reality, even though there are guys who look much more powerful, with the exception of Scott Norton, there probably isn't anyone in pro wrestling who could put Rude's arm down. I'm not sure the purpose of all this, but the past 2 weeks on television they've run angles where Sting held the Scorpion on Rude for a long period of time with all the faces making sure the hold wasn't broken, yet Rude doesn't sell his leg at the pay-per-view. Then the day before the pay-per-view Sting gets destroyed by the entire Dangerous Alliance in a hardcore angle, but the next date isn't even acknowledged, except as pertaining to Marcus Bagwell, nor does Sting even appear to be shaken up from the incident. They don't run angles, they just fill television time with incidents that means nothing as far as the arena or pay-per-view storylines. The fake crowd noise on TBS these past few weeks has been even more annoying than usual. Eric Bischoff on the syndicated main event show aired a Liger and Oz vs. Hiro Saito and Scott Norton match where Bischoff continually referred to Saito as Hiro Tatsuki. Now granted, it really doesn't make a difference to most people viewing, but I sure hope when you see college basketball games with players that you have no idea who they are that the announcers don't have so little respect for their audience as to call players by the wrong name. After all, they could figure that they could get away with it because the majority of viewers wouldn't know the difference. Jim Herd purchased a WCW table for the next Cauliflower Alley banquet in Los Angeles. When Luthez asked him who he'd bring, Herd joked, "Maybe I'll invite McMahon." Lex Luger has the entire month of January off, including the Clash at this point, with the exception of the Tokyo Dome show on Saturday afternoon. There is an awful lot of speculation that Luger won't be around much longer, but it's hard to imagine anyone walking out on that kind of a contract. There is talk of Power Hour on Saturday morning switching to more of a magazine-style format show in early 1992. December 20th in Baltimore saw PN News pin Terrence Taylor, Jim Garvin pin Diamond Dallas Page, Johnny B. Bad pin Richard Morton, Cactus Jack and Abdullah the Butcher beat Van Hammer and El Gigante when Jack pinned Hammer, Tom Zenk pinned Larry Zbyszko, Steve Austin drew with Scott Steiner, Liger pinned Pillman, Dustin Rhodes and Ricky Steamboat beat Arnold Anderson and Bobby Eaton. Rude pinned Sting and Rick Steiner beat Lex Luger via DQ in a 2-out-of-3 fall title match. December 26th in Dallas drew 3,300 as News pinned Taylor, Zenk pinned Zbyszko, Hayes pinned Page, worst match on the show, Bad pinned Morton. Bad was booed because fans in Texas don't go for the subtle effeminate act on a face. Jack and Abdullah beat Hammer and Gigante. Austin drew Scott Steiner. Second best match on show, Steamboat and Rhodes beat Eaton and Anderson. Good match, Medusa worked Sherry like at ringside. Liger pinned Pillman, one of the two best matches in Dallas during 1991. Although fans booed Liger generally as the foreigner, Rude beat Sting on a reverse decision DQ when Sting got the phone and KO'd Rude with it to apparently win the title, but a second ref reversed it and Luger pinned Rick Steiner with his feet on the ropes. Disappointing. Expect some Steiners vs. Young Pistols, Steiners vs. Vader and Hughes and Vader vs. Gigante matches around the horn in January. Virtually all the January shows will be headlined by Sting vs. Rude. Steve Armstrong is trying to do his own Southern-style singing as he did a concert this past Friday night in Sandy Springs, Georgia. Armstrong has just recorded a new album. December 25th at the Omni in Atlanta drew 3,600. Zenk pinned Zbyszko 3/4 star. News and Bad beat Page and Teddy Long Dud. Austin drew Scott Steiner 2 stars. Rude beat Sting via DQ when Sting wouldn't break the Scorpion on the ropes, and after the match Cactus ran in and Simmons made the save to set up the tag match main event for January 1st at the Omni. They may draw a crowd coming back this soon because all balcony seats are $3, 2 3/4 stars. Jack and Abdullah beat Hammer and Gigante 3/4 star. Highlight was after the match when they brawled in an empty portion of the arena. Liger pinned Pillman after Pillman did a belly-to-back superplex, but Liger got his shoulder up before the count and Pillman didn't. After the match, Pillman presented Liger with the belt and raised his hand, and the two embraced. The crowd really loved this match, which airs on television on WCW this coming Saturday. 4 1/4 stars. Steamboat and Rhodes beat Anderson and Eaton in a 2-out-of-3 fall match when Steamboat pinned Eaton in the third fall of a match which lasted 34 minutes. 4 stars. December 27th at the Meadowlands drew 3,900. All tickets priced at $7 and $11, as News pinned Taylor 1/2 star. Fans booed News unmercifully. Garvin pinned Page 1 1/2 star. Zenk pinned Zbyszko 3/4 star. Fans booed Zenk. Jack and Abdullah beat Hammer and Gigante 1 3/4 stars. Rude beat Sting via DQ on a reverse decision after Sting got the pin using the phone 2 1/2 stars. Bad pinned Morton 1 3/4 stars. Austin drew Scott Steiner in 14:10 2 stars. Liger pinned Pillman in 15:43. Liger did the Asai moonsault out of the ring, 3 3/4 stars. Steamboat and Rhodes beat Eaton and Anderson 3 1/4 stars, and Luger double count out Steiner in 9:03 2 3/4 stars. Diamond Stud missed STARRCADE, replaced by Night Stalker, because he had an operation to remove bone chips from his elbow. January 1st at the Omni has Taylor vs. Rich, Josh vs. Morton, Patriots vs. Pistols, Liger vs. Bad, News vs. Page, Zbyszko vs. Gigante, Steiners vs. Vader and Hughes, Rhodes and Steamboat and Wyndham, first match back, versus Anderson and Austin and Eaton and Sting and Simmons vs. Jack and Rude. As you can see, Harley Race is staying and will be managing Vader and Hughes in tag team matches against the Steiners during January. Mike Gray